Today I'm going to show you how I take nice looking photos of my artwork for social media and Etsy without any fancy camera equipment. The camera that I use is the one included on my phone, so I think the tips in this video will apply to most people who can see this video. This is an updated version of an older video that I made about 2 years ago where the audio was really bad because I was just starting out. In this video, I'm going to elaborate on things from the old video that people had questions about and give extra tips. So this video will still be useful for anyone who may have watched the old video already. A question I got a lot on the original video was, how am I using natural light without there being a ton of shadows? The first step to avoid shadows and take a nice photo is to choose the right place to take your photo. If you're taking photos on a budget, then the best thing to do is find natural light. So taking photos near a window is ideal, but there are a few things to be aware of when you use this method. You need to pay attention to the location of the sun. If the sun is shining directly onto your artwork, it's going to wash everything out and also create shadows. So don't use a window when the sun is shining directly inside. I have a window that gets direct sunlight first thing in the morning, so the best time of day for me to take photos will be after the sun has moved up above the window, usually after 11 a.m. for optimal, bright yet indirect light. When the sun is high up and not shining horizontally into the window is the best time for naturally lit photos. Next, you'll want to prepare your window and photo shoot area. If you have room darkening curtains or blinds, you'll want to open them as much as possible to let in that indirect sunlight. But you may still notice that you get shadows, so the next thing you'll want to do is diffuse the light. Diffused light is filtered through something first rather than shining on your subject directly. Diffused light scatters and bounces around and becomes more evenly distributed, which creates a softer look. You may have noticed that this happens naturally on cloudy days because the clouds are catching and scattering the light. Another way to think of it is comparing the light from a spotlight like this flashlight to the light from a lamp with a lampshade. Or in this case, I'm going to use tracing paper. The flashlight on its own is direct light, but when I put it through the tracing paper, then it becomes diffuse. Obviously, you wouldn't take your photos this way, but this is just an example of how diffusing your light can help. So the way that I diffuse natural light for my photos is just to use sheer white curtains. They're already part of my decor, so that's pretty convenient. Another benefit of diffusing the light is that it helps to neutralize the tone of the sunlight. As you can see, when I open the curtain, the tone becomes blue, and when I close it, it becomes more neutral. Depending on where you live and the weather, the tone that you get from outside will vary. For example, it might be more blue or cool toned at dawn and dusk, and more warm or yellowish in the middle of the day. You can always edit the tone of your photo using apps or programs, but I'll talk more about that later in the video. If the window that you want to use is in a shared space where you can't put up curtains permanently, you can buy a single sheer white curtain for a few dollars and hang it up with pins or whatever you have, and then take it down when you're done. Next, you'll choose your background. It's important to find a clean, flat background that won't distort or distract from your artwork. You can get really creative with this and come up with a background theme that complements your style of art. This can help your photos stand out and be more appealing. I like using this light-colored wooden shelf for my background. It's neutral enough not to distract from the art, but also adds a little bit of warmth. If you don't have a background that you like, an inexpensive option to fake a background is to buy a piece of wood, or some wrapping paper or scrapbooking paper in a color or pattern that you like. The nice thing about creating your own background is that it's portable and you can go wherever there's good lighting. I've also seen people use blankets and sweaters as backgrounds, which adds a nice soft texture. If you're taking photos of products for an online store, you'll definitely want to consider having a consistent theme that you use in the background of all of your photos. But if it's for a social media account, definitely switch it up and try lots of different backgrounds to keep your page interesting. My next tip is to use a few props to frame your artwork and tell a story to the viewer. This is definitely optional, but it's something fun to play around with if you've been getting bored of your photos lately. My favorite props are simply a few of the main art supplies that I use to make the artwork that I'm showing. Usually 2 or 3 of the main colors or tools that I used are enough. Another great prop is plants, either clipped from outside or the fake or real ones that I have inside. My go-to lately is this dried baby's breath flower, which I keep in a small vase when I'm not using it for photos. Rocks, crystals, and candles are also great props because they serve the purpose of holding your paper in place and holding down any curling corners. Just make sure the props you choose aren't too large. Large props and too many props can distract from your art. If I'm taking photos for Etsy listings, I'll often include coins, pens, and other items with consistent sizes that most people know of, which can help people get a better idea of the size of the item that they're looking at buying. The more you play around with adding props to your photos, the better you'll get at finding balance between everything you use. Another benefit of adding props to your photos is that it makes them less appealing for art thieves because they're going to have to edit out your props in order to sell your picture as a print. Now that you have your location, background, and props, you're going to set it all up. I like to imagine my artwork and props on a grid, so I like to line everything up and organize it in that way. But feel free to organize your photo however you like. Take some time to experiment with the angles and position of your props. Try them all parallel to your art or at angles and on different sides. The main thing is finding a balance between things looking neat and intentional, but also natural and not so rigid that it distracts from the focus of the picture. And finally, you want to find the right position for your camera. Something that really bothers me is when people film videos from above, but the angle is too far forward so everything feels slightly upside down. It's a little less noticeable with photos, but I think that even subconsciously, a photo that is directly above is more appealing to our brains. If we're distracted by a weird angle, then we aren't really paying attention to the subject of the photo. To take your photo from directly above, there are features you can use like the grid feature and the crosshairs that can help you position your camera just right. Or if you don't like changing your settings or having the lines on your screen, there's a visual trick you can do as well to accomplish the same thing. To do this, when you take your photo, pay attention to the space around or behind your art and line it up so you create a rectangle on each side instead of a more complicated shape. But of course, not everything has to be straight up and down all the time, and lots of artists will use angles to emphasize certain parts of their work. I also know artists who take photos at an angle specifically to prevent art theft, and that's totally fine and understandable. If that's something you're worried about, you should definitely use watermarks. Another thing that can make your art look warped is when the artwork itself is lumpy or curled at the corners. Something that I do to help with this is just to tape all of the curled places down. Or if you've got time, you could also let it rest under some heavy books to help flatten it out. You can also use tape to keep your props in place if you're using pencils and paintbrushes that keep trying to roll away. Just make sure the tape is out of the frame and not showing when you take your photo. Even when I have a well-lit photo, I will still usually edit it on Instagram or in Photoshop. Editing can't fix a bad photo, but it can make a good photo even better. The main things that I usually adjust are raising the contrast and brightness just a little, and sometimes the sharpness too if I want to show off detailed line work. And if it still seems a bit cool or warm, I'll definitely adjust that as well. And while I'm all about using natural light, I don't recommend taking photos of your artwork outside. There's a lot less control over the environment, and your artwork could blow away or get dirty. As you can see, there are also huge changes in the tone of the artwork depending on where you put it. But if outside is your only option, then just remember to avoid direct sun and find a clean area to use as a background or to put your temporary background. And it probably needs to be said that I'm not against expensive cameras and light boxes and other fancy setups for your photos if you can afford it. But I am a big fan of saving money and starting with what I already have instead of waiting for everything to be perfect and never getting started. Whether you're trying to gain a following on social media or showing off a product that you're trying to sell, putting a bit of extra effort into your photos can make all the difference. But please remember that likes and attention on social media should never be your #1 motivation for whatever it is that you're making, because that's a recipe for burnout and depression. If you're interested in learning more about how I sell my artwork on Etsy, be sure to check out my playlist about it linked here. I hope that you found these tips helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your art.